It's rivalry week, and it's all about the disrespect. And apparently, dating back to last year, they remember. Let's talk about the UNC Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Wolfpack, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Happy Wednesday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. We now fully divide our attention to the UNC Tar Heels. It's the big one coming up on Saturday in Carter-Finley, a night game at the Carter. We're going to start looking into what UNC has done so far this year, some of the names to watch out for. Of course, many NC State fans are already privy to those, but we're going to get into some of the numbers and what they mean for this game coming up on Saturday. First, we'll get into the record so far. UNC will enter this game with the same record as us, 8-3 overall, 4-3 in the ACC. Their wins, South Carolina in Charlotte by a score of 31-17, App State in overtime, 40-34, Minnesota, 31-13, on the road at Pitt, 41-24, Syracuse, 40-7, Miami, 41-31, Campbell, 59-7, and Duke at home in double overtime, 47-45. Kenton, of their 8 wins here, which stick out the most to you?
I don't want to be disrespectful here, but there are none that are really that impressive. And hear me out here, because I know somebody's going to say, oh, beating that Duke team or beating that Miami team. You beat a Duke with a third-string quarterback that was very banged up. And the Miami win, I mean, we've all talked about Tyler Van Dyke's struggles. He finally had a singular game without more interceptions than touchdowns in the ACC, in ACC play. And that was this last Saturday against Louisville. So, I mean, I guess if I had to name one, I guess it would be South Carolina. You know, that we didn't really know much about either team coming in, and they looked dominant defensively. I mean, they got home to Spencer Rattler at will. They made it extremely difficult on that team. And so I'd probably say that that's their marquee win of the season. Other than that, not really much to write home about in terms of like, wow, that was a really good win.
For me, I'm probably going to have to go with either that Miami win or that Duke win. Now, the Duke win most recently, because it went into double overtime, they rushed the field afterward. Duke was playing a third-string quarterback, and in a sense, it was kind of amazing that Duke was able to stay in that game as long as they were, even provide a little bit of a comeback in order to get to overtime. Yeah. But UNC ultimately found a way to win, whether you believe they deserve to win that game in the end or not. I'm not big on this should have lost or yada, yada, yada. End of the story is they won the game. They found a way to win. In some of these games, like the Miami win as well, UNC found a way to win. They found a way to close the game in the end. But flipping the script here and talking about the losses, sort of the inverse was finding a way to lose. Their losses are Virginia by a score of 31-27, on the road at Georgia Tech, 46-42, and most recently last week on the road at Clemson by a score of 31-20. And what I mean by finding a way to lose, this Virginia game was a game that UNC had no business losing. A Virginia team that had struggled mightily to go on the road in Chapel Hill and beat, I think they were number 10 in the country at that point in time. An embarrassing loss. And they follow that performance up by going on the road to Georgia Tech and again fumbling away a late lead and losing to Georgia Tech in embarrassing fashion. So a lot of NC State fans, of course, we're going to poke fun at that. But if you look further into that, UNC has struggled, like I mentioned, to hold on to a lead late in this game. So in talking about that, Kenton, I'll throw it back to you again. What about these losses have stood out to you the most?
I don't think this is a good team. I legitimately don't. And watching the trend of a team, you kind of see where they go throughout the season. Like each game has a life of its own, but they kind of form together to form a picture of your trajectory up or down. And when I look at this team and I say to myself, is this a really good UNC team or not? Or is this a team? And I'm like, oh man, like you really should be shaking in your boots to play this team. You look at the last 5 games, right? This team is 2-3 in those games. Their wins came over Campbell and a Duke team that is 1-4 in its last 5 games. I don't know what else to tell you other than I don't think that this team has been anything near the same of what they were before they lost to Virginia. But even that team, before they lost to Virginia, I don't think was anything all that special. So I don't think that this is a good team. I said the same thing about Miami in terms of like, how good are they really? Like this, we can look at the stats and say, oh yeah, all these stats and all these numbers. Who can't put up big numbers on Campbell? With all due respect to the Camels, if we're not on a baseball diamond, I'm not worried about the Camels.
UNC season, in a sense, it's almost believable and unbelievable at the same time. Believable in a sense because we've seen the same storyline play out over the last 3 or 4 years. They get all the love, all the buzz. They mow through their non-conference schedule, the first couple games of ACC play, and then around the midpoint, all of a sudden things just take a turn for the worse. And after what we saw last year with Drake May and what you saw the last year of Sam Howell, in addition to that, you had to think, is that going to happen to UNC again? How could they possibly let that happen to them again? When you have a quarterback as good as Drake May is, the defense was rumored to be much improved. Mac Brown, gets a lot of criticism, rightfully so, with the amount of talent in terms of what the record has ended up to look like in the end. Could it happen again? And then it happened again. They started off 6-0, and then from that point on, they've gone 2-3 since. So it's essentially the same storylines again for this team. NC State fans have kind of found a lot of comfort in the fact that, sure, UNC started off hot, but here we go again, entering this game, looking at the same record across from you on the other side of the field. And so spoke a little bit about this yesterday. This just feels like another example of, regardless of the records, regardless of the roller coaster of the season, you throw everything out when these two teams come into play, and you have really no idea what to expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want anybody to think to themselves, oh my God, like kids are saying that they don't have any good wins. Well, we don't have that many good wins either. I agree in terms of like actual, like, hey, this is a really, really great team that we beat other than probably Clemson. But with that being said, I mean, again, we're a team that's trending in the right direction. We're winning the games that we're supposed to win. We're winning the games that, and not only winning the games that we're supposed to win, we've been underdogs in 3 of the last 4 or all 4. Yeah, 3 of the last 4 because Wake Forest we were favored. We've been underdogs in 3 of the last 4, came away with wins in all 3. So this is not a situation that I'm looking up and saying, man, our good wins are better wins just because we're underdogs. No, our good wins, our wins or our trajectory is better because we're doing this. The plane is taking off, not landing. And that's what I think is the biggest deal here. Coming into this game on a 5-game winning streak, the second was tied for the second longest win streak in the conference versus coming off a loss to Clemson. Very, very different situations for our seasons here.
Up next, we'll be taking a look at the UNC offense and what they've done so far this year after a quick word from our sponsors. Our first sponsor of the day is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is simply the most fun you can have, winning up to 25 times your money this football and now basketball season. With basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball using the Specials League. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. So, for example, you can choose LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Scholes, you can now do so and find the community plays under the promos tab. These are entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each and every week. Of course, Prize Picks also offers the reboot policy. If one of your entries gets injured in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance policies. So head on over to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. We're back here talking about the UNC offense and some names to watch. Now, of course, many NC State fans, we already know the names. A lot of times we've tuned in to the Carolina games after NC State games have subsided to see what they would do. Not shedding any light on the subject, we all do it. If you're denying, you're lying. Everyone does it. We tune into them just as much as they tune into us. So some of these names here will not come as a surprise. But first, overall, the offense, UNC averages 38 points per game, which is a very explosive offense. Not even arguably, probably the best offense we have seen all year. Their passing attack ranks 8th nationally, which is first in the ACC. About 311 pass yards per game. Their rushing offense is ranked 12th nationally, which is also first in the ACC. They're averaging about 203 rush yards per game. Now, some of these names, of course, you already know them. Quarterback Drake May, he is 6th nationally in pass yards with 3,354. He's got 22 passing touchdowns, 7 picks. He's also ran for 343 yards and 8 touchdowns. What are your main points on how to prepare for a guy like Drake May?
I don't think that you prepare any differently than you do anybody else for this reason. He is so special and unique that if you try to prepare for all the things he can do, you're wasting your time. Find out the concepts that he likes, find out the concepts that they like to run, find out where those explosive plays are generally coming from, focus on the things that you like to do and how they mesh with each other, right? Figure out, all right, if they like hitting deep crossers, what does it look like for us to call this dog against deep crossers? If they like to go 4 verts, what does this blitz look like against 4 verts, and so on and so forth? I mean, I think that that's the way to go about it, because at the end of the day, you can't. A scout team quarterback generally cannot do the things that Drake May does. That's just the reality. And as much as I talk about how I don't think this team is that good, it's not because of this side of the ball. They are, they're balanced. They can run the ball well. Let me say this. On top of they can run the ball well, it's because they have really good skill position players. Their team is very much so a reflection of their culture, shall I say, right? All of the sizzle, all of the skill position players, phenomenal across the board. You got one of the best tight ends in the nation in Nesbitt. You got one of the better running backs in the nation in Hampton. You got a quarterback he's going to be in that green room for a very short time. But when you get to the people who win and lose your games, the big guys, all of a sudden, that's where you start to see the holes. Now, if they can find a way to counteract our dogs, they can find a way to open up some holes for Hampton. It's going to be a long day. But from what I've seen, that's going to be a real tall order for them. Very tall. So looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Now, of course, you mentioned the running back, Omarion Hampton. He's tied for first in the country in rushing yards with 1,414. He's top 5 nationally in missed tackles forced. He's averaging 6.3 yards per carry, and he's got 15 rushing touchdowns on the season. NC State's rush defense has been a big-time strength for the defensive performances we've seen of late, including just last week limiting Kyron Drones and Baishal Tootin to literally, 48 yards, I think it was?
Yeah, 48 yards combined. Yes, sir.
Limiting those two to just 48 yards was an outstanding accomplishment. You kept Clemson in check on the ground. You kept Miami relatively in check on the ground. You now have your biggest test of the year in Hampton, and including Drake May, who can also run it a fair amount. But Hampton is a whole other beast on the ground. Probably the only other comparable guy would have been Audric Estime from Notre Dame back in week 2. But Hampton, he's quick, he is strong, he attacks the hole, he gets through, and he's off to the races. He's hard to tackle, he breaks tackles, he makes you miss tackles. How can NC State prepare for a guy like Hampton?
The running back position, more than any other position, you do what you do. That's the reality. You break tackles or you don't. You have even leaving speed or you don't. The thing about Hampton is he's a 210 to 220 pound guy that has even leaving speed. So the key to this game for the defense, gap discipline. The key to beating this UNC offense, make them do it right every time. Make them eat up bits and pieces of the field. Keep everything in front of you. Make them have to go play after play after play doing it right. Don't surrender the big play, because if you are out of your gap, the ball will find it. And with Omarion Hampton, even though he's listed at 6 feet, 220 pounds, he can scoop. He can absolutely move. When he gets those long strides going, it's a chance that he's going to run away from you. So the reality is, with a guy that big, your charge is to not let him get to the second, third level untouched, because then it's Katie Dids at the doorstep. Him with the safety one-on-one, again, I've talked about the problem with their team is always the substance. It's always that. It's always the buffet busters. Don't do no busting. So that's the reality of what we're looking at. Our job is to reestablish the line of scrimmage, be in the gaps, do not let him get going, and then make him figure it out from there.
The biggest point of emphasis in stopping Hampton will certainly be NC State controlling the line of scrimmage. If you can keep him at bay, that will go a long way in trying to contain this UNC offense. But last big name to watch before we flip it over to the defense, obviously wide receiver Tez Walker is well known. Now, despite missing a small portion of the season, he is their leading receiver coming into the last week of the regular season. What kind of dynamic does Tez Walker give this already explosive offense?
Tez Walker has almost everything that you could want from a receiver, very seriously. There are not too many things that you could ask and say, hey, we expect this of a wideout that he doesn't bring you. And I don't say that jokingly. I don't say that in the standpoint of like, oh, man, we should be shaking in our boots and we should be terrified. There's a reason that the governor and the AG and everybody and their mama was writing letters for this young man. This is a guy that is 6'3", 200 pounds, that can high point the ball well, that gets in and out of breaks well, that doesn't have a problem with concentration drops. I mean, you name it. He is, by all intents and purposes, the whole package at wide receiver. Thank God for that man, Aiden White, because you're going to need that matchup to be a premier one in this game, because, I mean, objectively speaking, if you don't have a corner or safety that's big time that can deal with him, it's going to be a long day for you. It's going to be a real long day for you. When he gets the ball in his hands after the catch, he can do some special things with it as well. So, like I said, for all intents and purposes, he has everything you want from a receiver.
Certainly need an A game from Mr. Aiden White. Flipping over to the defense here in just a second after a quick word from our sponsors. Our second sponsor of the day is LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the best access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Add your job and use the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile in order to spread the word that you are hiring. Then use simple tools like screening questions to make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Last portion of our Wednesday episode here, discussing the defense for UNC. Like you mentioned, Kenton, a lot of the issues that have plagued this team have been circled around the defense. Their pass defense is now ranked 14th in the ACC, dead last, giving up an average of 234 pass yards a game. Their rush defense is ranked 11th in the ACC, giving up an average of 162.5 rush yards a game. What has been some of the most surprising things you've seen from this UNC defense?
Nothing. With all due respect, if you've watched me talk about this team on Locked On ACC, I've said multiple times, this is a team that was bad defensively last year, lost their entire secondary, lost a good chunk of their front seven as well, and people expect them to get better based on what? Not exactly understanding. This is a unit that has some good individual players. They have some players that, if you allow them to, they'll be game wreckers. But outside of that, what is that? What's the word I'm looking for? Mid. mid, completely. I mean, with all due respect, they're average pedestrian at best outside of about three guys. And all three of the guys I'm thinking of are in that front seven. So behind them, of course, they can't stop a pass. I mean, their defensive backs can't cover grass. So, yeah.
Yeah, we had expressed many concerns about this UNC defense in the preseason simply because of the fact all of a sudden folks were expecting them to be head and shoulders above what we saw this past year. And while they looked a little bit better against less stiff competition earlier in the year, they sort of came back to earth once ACC play really got started.
I disagree. They came back to earth before ACC play started. They came back to earth the App State game. You had a running back that was like 5'8" go off for, 195 or something like that? Like, what? I knew right then. I said, you cannot trick me, boys in baby blue. I know what this is. I'm familiar with your game. You cannot fool me, friend.
But again, some of these names to watch here for the Tar Heel defense. Linebacker Cedric Gray gets probably the most attention. He's their leading tackler by a pretty wide margin. He's got 104 of those, 4.5 sacks. Came into this season with a lot of – he was one of 3 first-team linebackers that riled up a lot of NC State fans, seeing that Peyton Wilson was not on that list. But Cedric Gray really hasn't been that spectacular this season, I would say. He's really seemed to cool off a bit once ACC play really got rolling, kind of the middle part of this season. Now, he's still a very solid player. He is a guy to keep your eye on, but I don't think he's reached that level that everyone had put him on in the preseason.
Yeah, I agree. He's been good, but he's also had some moments that have severely cost his team, like last week. The other two guys I would probably say, like, hey, you need, again, game records if you allow them to be, would probably be Power Echols and Kamen Rucker.
Yep.
I mean, those two, I think that again, they're good and they specialize in certain things. Power Echols, he's a good linebacker. I don't really have too much else to say about him. He does movement well. He is very good with lateral movement, very good at diagnosing plays. And Kamen Rucker, phenomenal pass rusher. But outside of them, I struggle to see anybody on this defense that I'm like, oh my God, that kid is, you could play your best game, okay? And if that kid is rolling, you're done. There's no hope, not a single one outside of those 3. And even with those 3, I'm not like, there's no way you can stop him. It's like, no, they're really good players.
So with all that being said, what are your main areas of exploitation that NC State's offense should be looking at here?
Anai, get creative. Cook those DBs, please. Those boys are hibachi. Actually, no. This defense is what I like to call chicken Alfredo. You know why I like to call a defense like this chicken Alfredo? Everybody cooks it. It's the easiest thing in the world to cook. And that's what I'll call this defense, because it should be that. This offense should go into this game with the mentality of, we're going to out-physical you up front. Because, again, even your guys who are special, they're not so special when there are big guys in their lap. They just are not. So we're going to run downhill, be physical with you. We're going to establish our identity. And then off our identity, we'll find some KC behind you. We'll find a little Timmons behind you. We'll get the ball to Trent Penix. By the way, we're undefeated this year when Trent Penix scores a touchdown. I'm just saying. Maybe find ways to keep getting them the ball. But the reality is very simple. This is a defense that really, the question shouldn't be, how can we exploit them? The question should be, who needs to get fired if we can?
My main point here was that NC State needs to assert themselves offensively. They've gotten a lot more creative. They're starting to find a little bit of a stride. They need to be overly physical in this game. If you out-physical the UNC defense, they will break. They won't bend. They will just break. So NC State needs to assert their will. The physicality that Brennan Armstrong provides seems like a perfect key to this type of defense. And of course, Brennan in all his years at UVA has often cooked up on UNC. So he's no stranger to what it takes to beat UNC through the air and on the ground. But you talk about the creativity of Robert Anae, another great opportunity to assert your big old brain on this UNC defense that struggles a bit in keeping the big plays in front of them, holding on to a lead if they have one late in this game. They get a little bit soft. They lose their assignments. They lose their discipline. Robert Anae is the perfect guy to go and attack that sort of thing. And then, of course, like it has been all season, if you continually get the ball into KC and let him do the rest, if you allow him to be the playmaker he is, I have a lot of faith in him being able to beat UNC through the air or on the ground. Continue to get the ball into his hands. And, we've been asking all season, who might else step up? Trent Penix, great option. Kendrick Raphael is now the bell cow in the backfield. We're going to need a big game from him. He's got great field vision, as we've seen so far this year. If you can get him into the second and third level of this UNC defense, he could go. We're probably going to need another wide receiver to just step out just for a couple appearances, whether that's Rosner, whether that's Gray, maybe some Porter Rooks, somebody else to take a little bit of the load off of KC. But all in all, this NC State offense needs to keep the momentum rolling. They've done such a great job in continuing to build, continuing to grow. And of course, you've reached the last game of the season here against a defense that has struggled at many points this year. Keep the intensity up. Be more physical than this Tar Heel defense.
Be the bullies. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, this is not a defense that you're looking at saying, oh my God, they're going to have you shaking in your boots. I think the Wake Forest defense is much better than this one. So the goal here, very similarly to the Wake Forest game, very similarly to the Virginia Tech game, come out, establish your identity, assert your will, lean on this team. Like you said, if you lean on them, if you assert your will, they'll break. They will. We've seen it time and time again this year. This isn't a new thing. This isn't a phenomenon. It's like, oh my God, like could they break this game? Yes, they can, and they should.
The NC State offensive line has gotten better as this season has progressed, hoping for their best performance yet in this one, as it could open up a world of offense for NC State. That'll do it for us here on Wednesday. As always, thank you all so much for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like button. Drop your comments in the comment box of what you think of UNC's season so far. I also noticed we have crossed the 900 mark of subscribers. Thank you all so very much for the support. Now we got our eyes on 1K. We're going to hit 1K here before we know it. Couldn't do it without the support of Wolfpack Nation. Very grateful for each and every one of you. We will see you all tomorrow. Until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.